Chapter 17. A week spent cooped up in that dusty room was enough to make anyone feel stir-crazy, and it wasn't long before I looked forward to Grayson's brief visits to a concerning degree. Despite the cold shoulder he was determined to give me, I found myself implicitly entreating him to stay when he came by, asking inane questions and desperately attempting pointless conversation. It was no surprise that he quickly grew aggravated with this behavior, culminating in him storming out of the room on me one day as I tried to stall him. It was a clear sign as any that he had no interest in talking to me. With a sigh, I resigned myself to the unending boredom, only for Grayson to return later the same day with several books in his arms.
Here,
he grumbled, dumping them onto the bed. I stared at them for a moment, not quite registering. They were all second-hand, with worn covers and browning pages, and I was baffled to think he had managed to find them in a place like this. I turned my eyes to meet his, but he was staunchly avoiding my gaze. Thank you, I stammered finally, stunned. He acknowledged me with a grunt, then stalked off just as suddenly as he'd entered. I sat to examine what he had brought me. A volume of Keats' poetry, a couple of history books, and a copy of Ivanhoe. Where had he gotten these? Had he bought them for me, or had them on hand? They didn't seem like the types of books Grayson would own. Then again, he never failed to surprise me. Whatever their origins, I wasn't sure I had ever been so happy to see books. Eager to do something that wasn't pacing and staring out the grimy window, I began leafing through Keats. When I wasn't reading, I spent my time listening to the comings and goings of patrons from the other side of the door. I always recognized Johanna's voice, chatting and laughing and making vulgar jokes as she led various men to a room. Sometimes I tried to keep track of how many clients she had. During daylight hours they were few, 2 or perhaps 3 at most. At night she made out better, bedding as many as 5 men within only a few hours. As I sat there against the wall, listening, I wondered what it was like to live like that, taking coin from one man after another, making just enough to eat and get by, and then doing it all over again the next day. It couldn't be pleasurable for her, at least not any more. Yet every time she walked by, she was perfectly cheerful, even despite the incident a few days ago. I was both fascinated and horrified. It was difficult to fathom how a woman who spent every day being groped, stared at, and allowing pirates who had been God knows where to put themselves all over her could be so content. There were a few other voices I became familiar with. Most of them had thick Spanish accents, and I only heard a few of them consistently speaking English. One of the girls was called Sophia. I only knew this because she had a regular who would stumble down the corridor every night singing, "Sophia, Sophia, Sophia," to no particular tune. Then there was an older woman with a husky voice who, though she didn't get as much business as the others, often had men howling so loud that I could hear it from across the inn. Another girl only spoke a few words of English and sounded quite young. 16, perhaps, and rather shy, but I frequently heard her timid voice as well. Though Grayson's gesture was greatly appreciated, it took only a few days before I had gone through all the books at least once, and I was left once again with not many ways to spend my time. I found myself sitting outside the door more frequently, listening to the activities outside, and developing a strange fondness for the prostitutes as they conducted their business. Foolish, perhaps. But I could only read Ivanhoe so many times, and it kept me from imagining what might happen once my father saw my letter. Evenings were always the liveliest. One night in particular, just as I was thinking that I should get some sleep, there came the shriek of a girl from outside. It was followed immediately by a chorus of shouting. This was not unusual. At least once per night there was an altercation of some manner. But this affair was particularly emphatic. Shortly thereafter, I heard Johanna's voice rise above the din, screaming at someone to get out.
Oi! Bugger off!
Much more shuffling, yelling, and heavy footsteps later, it was suddenly quiet, save the sound of someone softly crying. I stood, my ear to the door, heart dropping into the pit of my stomach. Was someone hurt? I hadn't heard a blow being dealt, but it could easily have been drowned out. I strained my ears. But everyone else involved seemed to have left. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and cracked it open. The hall was indeed empty, except for a girl with a small frame huddled against the wall, hands cradling her face and shaking with silent sobs. I hesitated to move any closer until I noticed the blood trickling from underneath her hand. I was there before I could stop myself, pulling her arms away from her face to look. The blood was streaming from a swollen nose, and tears continued to roll down her face as she looked up at me with startled brown eyes. She was just a teenager, I realized, barely of age. My stomach twisted unpleasantly. I glanced back at my still open door, and without much thought, made another snap decision. Come with me, I encouraged her, putting an arm around her shoulders and guiding her towards my room. She offered no resistance and let me steer her into my small washroom, where I grabbed a rag from the basket and dipped it into the basin to wipe the blood from her nose. She flinched at my touch, but the cool water seemed to soothe her as her sobs slowly subsided while I cleaned her face. Once the blood had been washed away, I inspected her nose. Although the area was red and puffy, it didn't appear to be broken. Now much calmer, the girl stared back at me with some confusion, likely wondering who I was. But still she said nothing. She was pretty, I thought, with a small round face dotted with freckles and wispy black hair. Her dress was a bit too tight, though I suspected this was by design, as it pushed her breasts into view.
Anna!
Johanna's voice called from outside. The girl turned, and then glanced at me uncertainly before scurrying back into the hallway, with me right behind. Johanna ran to her from the top of the stairs.
Let me see your face.
She insisted.
Does it hurt?
Anna nodded meekly, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. I cleared my throat. It isn't broken. Just swollen.
Who the hell is she?
Another voice said, permeated with a heavy accent. I looked up to see another woman at the top of the stairs now, with olive skin and thick black hair braided over one shoulder. She scowled as she strode towards us, but Johanna was quick to calm her.
Grayson's girl,
Johanna said, and I barely managed not to blush. The woman, perhaps this was Sophia, relaxed her shoulders, then turned her attention to Anna to begin speaking in rapid Dutch. I was completely unable to follow, but her tone was stern, almost as though she was gently scolding. I chewed on my lip. I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer to this question, but I asked it regardless. Why did he hit her?
Rustig aan.
Sophia finished her lecture with a sigh.
Godverdomme. She told him she was a virgin. When there was no blood, he realized she was lying.
The expressions on Johanna and Sophia's face had darkened, though it took me another moment to understand. Some men were partial to virgins, I had heard, particularly when they were young. My stomach flipped over in disgust. Sophia turned thick, furrowed brows on me.
Since when does Grayson keep a woman? He never touches us.
Brought her last week. She talks all fancy. Must have paid a pretty penny for her.
She added, shooting me a wink. I shifted uncomfortably, unsure how I should respond, so I said nothing. Anna directed her eyes to me and began to fidget.
Thank you,
she said slowly, with an uncertain glance at Sophia for confirmation. I tried to smile, hoping that it didn't look too sad.
I'm taking her to bed,
Sophia declared. Johanna nodded in agreement.
Night, Penny,
she said, giving me one of her toothy smiles. I watched the three of them vanish into one of the rooms, unable to soothe the ache in my heart. I hadn't stopped thinking about how unfazed Johanna had been the other day when that man had struck her. How many times had it happened before she became inured to it? And how many more times would it happen to Anna before it no longer made her cry? Realizing that I was now alone in the hallway, I turned to withdraw to my room and found a man standing in my path. With a start, I all but leapt backwards, stumbling over myself in surprise. Nathaniel Redthorn, the same man who had been so intent on putting his hands on me the day we'd arrived. He loomed over me, gaunt and imposing, and flashed a set of yellowing teeth at me in a malicious grin.
Are you lost, love?